When my estranged grandfather passed away, I never expected to be summoned to his estate. My relationship with the family had always been fractured, whispers behind closed doors, half-truths about my parents, and a long-standing belief that I was the black sheep. So, when the will reading came, I went more out of obligation than hope, but from the moment I walked into that mahogany-paneled room filled with stiff necks and sideways glances, I felt it, the judgment, the resentment. The unspoken rule that I didn't belong. And then, the lawyer spoke. According to the official terms, I was deemed unworthy of inheritance. Laughter followed. Smug smirks. It felt like they had all rehearsed this moment without me, that was, until the lawyer pulled out one last envelope. An unexpected handwritten note from my grandfather, addressed solely to me. As I read his words aloud, the atmosphere shifted. Faces drained of color. Secrets began to tremble beneath forced smiles. My grandfather's final message wasn't just sentimental, it was a reckoning. And I had just lit the match, now everything they tried to hide is about to come undone. Hadn't stepped foot in that house for over 10 years. Not since the fight. Not since the day I packed what little I had into a duffel bag and left without looking back. But death has a strange way of pulling people back together, tightening blood ties like a noose. The invitation to the will reading came on thick parchment, with the family crest embossed in gold. No return address. Just my name written in handwriting I hadn't seen since childhood. The handwriting of the man I used to call Grandpa. I thought about throwing it away. I really did. But something in me needed closure. Or maybe revenge, I'm still not sure. When I arrived at the estate, the gravel crunched under my boots like it was trying to warn me. The house hadn't changed. Ivy strangled the stone walls just like I remembered. The air still smelled of pine, old books, and secrets. They were all already there, of course. My Uncle Simon, who once accused me of stealing from him when I was 13. My Aunt Miriam, who always pretended I didn't exist. And my cousin Lila, dressed like she was attending a red carpet, not a funeral. The room was heavy with silence. When I entered, eyes flicked up. Some barely acknowledged me. Others scoffed. One of them actually whispered, he showed up, like I was a ghost they'd already buried. The lawyer, Mr. Halvorson, cleared his throat and gestured for me to sit. They'd left the chair at the very end of the long mahogany table, far from the family portraits and even farther from where anyone else sat. I took it without a word. The reading began. He left the vineyard to Simon, the lake house to Miriam, stocks and art to various cousins. The numbers were obscene. Generational wealth handed out like party favors, and then it came to me, to my grandson. Mr. Halvorson read, adjusting his glasses, I leave nothing. I didn't flinch. I had prepared myself for that. But the room erupted. Snide giggles, gasps masked as coughs, Lila's barely concealed grin. I could feel the satisfaction radiating off them. They had waited for this. They wanted me humiliated. Mr. Halvorson raised a hand, silencing the room. There is one more thing. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a sealed envelope. My name on the front, in that same familiar handwriting. I took it. My hands were steady, but my chest was thudding so hard I was sure they could hear it. I opened it slowly, deliberately, letting their anticipation stew, and then I read, if they're laughing now, let them. They never knew what I truly valued. You, however, you will know everything soon. But only if you follow the path I left. Start with the letter hidden in the clock tower. You remember the one. You used to climb it when you were small. The truth lives there, and once it's spoken, none of them will ever look at you the same again. The room went silent, dead silent. Mr. Halvorson didn't say another word. He just nodded and closed his folder. I looked around at them. At their faces. Pale. Confused. Afraid. I folded the note and put it back into the envelope, and I didn't say anything else. because I knew this wasn't over. It was just beginning. The clock tower stood like a forgotten sentinel at the edge of the estate grounds, its stone walls veined with moss, its hands frozen at 3:17, the exact time it stopped ticking years ago, after lightning struck it during a summer storm. I used to sneak up there as a kid, hiding from the world with a flashlight and a half-eaten apple, imagining the tower was mine alone. Now, I was here as an adult, retracing the steps of a memory that had suddenly become a clue. I climbed slowly, feeling the ache of time in my knees and in the wooden stairs, each creak echoing like a warning. Dust coated the railing. The air grew colder with each step. By the time I reached the top, my hands were trembling, not from fear, but from something deeper. A knowing. A weight. The hatch opened with a reluctant groan, and I stepped into the old bell room. Nothing had changed. The cracked telescope was still by the window. The pile of worn-out books was still in the corner, the same ones my grandfather used to read to me from, stories about lost heirs and double lives. I never realized, until now, how close to home those stories had hit. Then I saw it, taped to the underside of the bell's wooden beam, barely holding on with yellowed tape, was an envelope. My name was on it again. Smaller handwriting this time. Shaky. Like it had been written with urgency. I tore it down carefully and opened it. If you're reading this, it means they think they've won. They haven't. I had to play my role, pretend you meant nothing to me, to protect you from what this family became. There was a time I believed they could change. I was wrong. They've buried more than just secrets in this house, and you're the only one left who can unearth them. Do you remember the red ledger in the study? The one I always said was off limits? Go there. Open it. Page 72. But do it alone. If they see you with it, they'll destroy it, and maybe you, too. I stood frozen for a moment, the letter still in my hands, my breath fogging in the air, didn't want to believe what I had just read. But deep down, I did. I remembered the way my grandfather used to stop speaking mid-sentence when certain people entered the room. I remembered how the locks on his study door had 3 different keys. I remembered the one time I found him staring at that red book with tears in his eyes, then snapping it shut when I walked in. He was scared, and now, I was being told to be brave. I left the tower without looking back. Every rustle of the wind felt like a whisper. Every shadow in the corridor felt too still. The study hadn't been touched since his death. The dust lay like a veil on the desk, on the globe, on the collection of antique keys still hanging from the wall. I found the red ledger tucked behind a row of fake encyclopedias. Its leather was worn, but intact. Heavy. I opened it. Page 72. Wasn't a ledger entry. It was a photograph of a boy. Me, standing beside a man who wasn't my father, behind them, a car with a license plate I'd never seen before, and on the back of the photo, written in my grandfather's unmistakable hand, "He's the reason they want you gone. You were never supposed to know. But now you must." I didn't hear the study door open, but I heard her voice. "What did you just find?" It was Lila, and her smile wasn't friendly anymore. Lila didn't walk into the room. She slithered. Her heels barely made a sound on the hardwood floor, and her voice was sugar-laced venom. "I asked you a question," she said, leaning casually against the doorframe like she hadn't just crept up on me like a predator. I tucked the photo back into the ledger and closed it slowly, deliberately, keeping my eyes on hers. "Just family records," I said. Lila tilted her head. Her smile was still there, but her eyes were scanning, calculating. "Funny," she murmured. "Grandfather never let anyone touch that book. Especially not you." I stood, keeping the ledger under my arm. "Maybe he changed his mind before he died." "Did he?" she said, stepping closer. "Or are you just playing detective now that you realized he left you nothing?" There it was. The real reason she was here. The will had rattled her. The note even more so. None of them were afraid of me until they saw my grandfather had left me breadcrumbs, and that terrified them. You always wanted to be one of us, she said, almost with pity. But the truth is, you were never really part of this family. Everyone knew it. Everyone talked about it. You were the charity project. The mistake we all had to tolerate. I didn't flinch. I wanted to, but I didn't. Then why are you following me? I asked. Lila's face froze for a second. Then she smiled again, wider this time, almost brittle. Because I like watching people get in over their heads. She turned and walked away without another word. I didn't breathe until I heard her. Heels vanished down the hallway. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stayed in one of the guest rooms near the east wing, the one farthest from the others. I locked the door. Twice. I sat with the red ledger on my lap, staring at the photograph again. I knew the man in the picture wasn't my father. My father died before I could remember him. Or so I was told. But the man in this photo, his hand on my shoulder, smiling like someone proud of a son, looked too familiar. I took the photo downstairs to the library and started digging. Old photo albums. Newspaper clippings. Anything that might give me a name. And I found it, not in the family archive, but in a dusty box marked Estate Affairs, 1992. Inside, buried under land deeds and court documents, was a black and white copy of a restraining order, issued by my grandfather, against a man named Richard Hale, the same man from the photo. The reason? Unauthorized contact with minor. Violation of custody agreement. Endangerment. I read it twice. Then again, Richard Hale wasn't a stranger. He was my father, and they'd lied, the entire family. They'd buried him, not with dirt, but with stories, with silence, with legal papers and rewritten memories. They told me he died when I was 2, but now, I knew better, and suddenly, it made sense, the way they always looked at me. The way my presence at family events was treated like an inconvenience. The way they never spoke of the early years. Because I was the reminder. The living proof of something they wanted erased. I took the photograph and the restraining order and went back to my room. I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, feeling every second stretch. When the morning sun broke through the curtains, I was still fully dressed, sitting upright, the photo in my hand. A knock on the door startled me. I opened it slowly. It was Uncle Simon, and he looked terrified. Pack your things, he whispered. They know what you found. You need to leave. Now. I didn't pack. I stared at Uncle Simon like he had spoken in another language. He wasn't the kind of man who whispered or warned. He was the kind who barked orders from behind his wine glass. Seeing fear in his eyes, real, animal fear, shook me more than any threat. What do you mean they know? I asked. Simon glanced over his shoulder. Lila told Miriam. Miriam went straight to your Aunt Julia. Now they're in the solarium. Whispering like schoolgirls planning a murder. I waited for him to smile, to joke. He didn't. You shouldn't have come back, he said. I told your grandfather years ago, if he wanted peace in this house, he had to keep you out. That part stung more than I expected. But I held my voice steady. So why warn me now? Simon hesitated. For the first time in my life, he looked like he might tell the truth. Because I watched them ruin your father, he said quietly. And now they'll do the same to you. Maybe worse. You think they hated you because of money? No. It's because you carry his blood. And because your grandfather gave you access. He pointed to the red ledger still on my desk. If you found the photo, then you know. But you don't know everything. I followed him back to the study. The house was unusually silent, like it was holding its breath. Simon locked the door behind us. He moved to the bookshelf and ran his fingers across the spines. Stopped at one. A faded volume of Shakespeare. With a sharp tug, he pulled it forward. A mechanical click echoed, the fireplace groaned open. Behind it, a narrow stone staircase spiraled down into darkness. This is where he kept the real ledger, Simon Said. Not that decorative one upstairs. The truth is down there. I hesitated at the top of the stairs. What kind of truth? He didn't answer. I stepped into the passage, the air turning colder with every footfall. The walls were damp. Old. I wondered if this place had existed before the estate was even built. At the bottom was a steel door. Simon unlocked it with a key he pulled from around his neck. Inside was a small room, no larger than a walk-in closet. A desk. A filing cabinet. And one thick black journal sitting dead center, lit by a single hanging bulb. I opened it. There were no financial entries. No property deeds, only confessions and names. Dates. Meetings. It read like a manifesto, a record of betrayals, alliances, blackmail. My grandfather had documented every sin committed by this family for the past 40 years. Including the lie that buried my father. One entry stopped me cold. May 14, 1993. Miriam insisted Richard was becoming a threat. Said he was unstable. She brought the doctor's report, but I knew it was fabricated. I didn't care. I signed the petition anyway. For the boy's safety, I told myself. But I regret it now. Every day. Because the boy still sees his father in dreams. And I can't tell him the truth without burning down the family. I closed the journal. Simon watched me, expression unreadable. I didn't know he wrote it all down, he said. But I knew. Some of it. Enough to want you gone. Not because I hated you. But because I was scared of what you'd bring back. I took the journal. I'm not leaving. Simon didn't argue. When we returned to the study, the door was unlocked. We both froze. The journal was heavy in my hands. Opened the door slowly. Lila was sitting in the desk chair, legs crossed, smiling. Took you long enough, she said. Now, let's talk about what it'll cost to make you forget what you've read. I stepped inside. Simon didn't follow. The door closed behind me. Lila leaned back in the chair like she owned it. Like she'd been waiting there for hours. Planning every breath. Her hands were folded neatly in her lap, but her eyes flicked to the journal in my hands like it was ticking. You read it, didn't you? She said. The whole thing. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. She stood up, slowly, as if rising too fast would set something off. You don't know what you're holding. That journal is napalm. You could destroy all of us with it. The businesses, the foundations, the last shreds of credibility this family has. I held her gaze. Maybe that's exactly what I should do. Lila's face twitched, just for a second. Not fear. Calculation. She was already moving to plan B. We can negotiate, she said. Money. Properties. A seat at the table. You've always wanted to be seen, this is your chance. Be smart. You don't have to be a martyr to a man who's been dead 2 weeks. You mean my grandfather? I said. The only person in this family who ever told me the truth? Her lips tightened. He didn't tell you everything. She reached into her bag and pulled out another envelope. This one was thinner. Faded. She held it out like a weapon. I found this in his safe. The night he died, she said. He meant to burn it. Changed his mind, I guess. But if you're going to play judge and jury, you should see the whole picture. I took it. Opened it. Inside was a letter, not from my grandfather, but from my father, handwritten. Undated. Just 2 pages. It started with my name. He spoke of regret. Of love. Of how he fought for me in courts I never knew existed. He said he'd tried to contact me, tried to send letters, but every attempt was intercepted. He begged my grandfather for mercy. Begged him to let me choose when I was old enough, but the line that broke me was this: if you're reading this, then your grandfather finally chose the boy over the legacy. I hope he was brave enough to let you hate him for what he did. The air left my lungs. Lila watched me carefully, like she was trying to read whether the letter had weakened me or sharpened my edges. You see now, she whispered. He was never innocent. He chose power, just like the rest of us. So don't act like you're above it. I folded the letter slowly and looked at her. No one in this family is innocent. But I'm not asking to be above anything. I'm asking to be done. Layla narrowed her eyes. What does that mean? It means I'm not staying. I'm not joining your game. I'm not selling the truth for a country house and a fake title. I'm taking the journal, and I'm going to decide what the world deserves to know. Layla stepped forward, voice sharp. You won't survive the fallout. I smiled, just barely. That's the difference between you and me. I don't care if I do. I walked past her. Out of the study. Down the hallway lined with portraits of ancestors who smiled down on this poisoned bloodline like monarchs of decay. Simon was waiting by the front door. He didn't say anything. Just opened it. You're not going to stop me? I asked. No. He said. Just promise me one thing. What? When you light the match, don't look back. I didn't promise. I stepped outside, the air thick with coming rain. The journal was tucked under my arm. The letter was in my pocket. For the first time in my life, I wasn't walking away empty-handed. I was walking away with the truth, and I was ready to let the whole world burn if that's what it took to finally be free.